You've probably heard about Venezuela in the news, right? And maybe you've noticed its official name, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Well, that name isn't just for show. It's a shout-out to the legacy of one man who, 200 years ago, fought for freedom across a piece of land bigger than all of Western Europe. He was a general, a revolutionary, a thinker, a president, but who is the real man behind the legend?
And just when you think you haven't figured out, you come across a quote like this one. Now, this wasn't an enemy talking. This was Simón Bolívar himself, the great liberator, talking about the USA. It tells you right away, this isn't going to be some simple story about a hero in shining armor. No, this is the story of a brilliant, complicated, and deeply conflicted man who saw both the promise and the danger of freedom.
His name is literally everywhere in South America. There's a whole country, Bolivia, named after him. The money is called the Bolivar. You'll find statues of him in almost every town square. He's become this huge political symbol, right? But with all this myth-making, it's easy to lose sight of the actual person. So in this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise. We're going to ask, who was the real Simón Bolívar, and what can his story teach us today?
Alright, so here's our game plan. To get the man, you've got to get his world. So we'll start with how colonial Latin America was basically a powder keg. Then we'll see how Napoleon accidentally lit the fuse. We'll follow Bolívar's absolutely epic military campaign, watch his big dream of a united continent fall apart, and then wrestle with his legacy. And finally, we'll do a really fascinating comparison with our own independence struggle here in India.
Okay, let's jump in. Picture this. It's the late 1700s. For 300 years, Spain has been the boss of a massive American empire. But just under the surface, things are tense. The pressure is building up. It's a world just simmering with anger, injustice, and some very dangerous new ideas. It was a world just waiting for a spark.
So first things first, you have to understand the social ladder. Right at the tippy top, where the peninsula is, basically guys born in Spain. They got all the best jobs, running the government, the church, everything. Just below them, you had the criollos. Now these guys had pure Spanish blood, but they were born in the Americas. They owned the land, the mines. They were super rich and educated, but they were completely locked out of any real power in their own country. And this wasn't just annoying, it was a deep, burning insult.
And listen, we're not talking about a handful of people here. By 1800, there were about 3.5 million criollos. This was a huge, powerful class of people who were watching their own wealth and lives being controlled by outsiders. They were reading the same philosophy books as the Europeans, but were still being treated like second-class citizens. You can just imagine how much that would have grated.
And the economy? Well, it was a one-way street, designed for one thing, to make Spain rich. It was basically a loot system. Take the famous silver mines of Potosí. They alone provided something like 80% of Spain's colonial income. The whole point was to pull out resources, silver, sugar, you name it, and ship it to Europe. Spain made sure no local industries could ever compete, so the colonies were sitting on a mountain of wealth, but they weren't allowed to build their own economies. Pure exploitation.
Into this pressure cooker, you have these explosive new ideas coming in from across the ocean. The Enlightenment was talking about natural rights, about governments needing the people's consent. Pretty radical stuff when you're ruled by a king thousands of miles away. Then came the revolutions. America showed everyone that, hey, a colony can actually beat a European superpower. The French Revolution spread wild ideas of liberty, though its bloody turn made the rich criollos a bit nervous. And then, Haiti. Enslaved people had risen up, defeated Napoleon's army, and started their own country. For the oppressed, it was a massive inspiration. But for the slave-owning elites, like Bolívar's own family, it was an absolute nightmare.
So the powder keg was ready. The revolutionary ideas were swirling around. All that was missing was a spark. And that spark, funnily enough, came from Napoleon Bonaparte over in Europe.
In 1808, Napoleon does what Napoleon does. He invaded Spain. He kicks out the Spanish king, Ferdinand VII, and puts his own brother on the throne. Now, this was a total bombshell for the colonies. For 300 years, their loyalty was to the Spanish king. But who was the king now? The guy in a French prison, or the French guy on the throne? The central pillar holding the whole empire together had just been kicked away.
The criollos' response was actually very clever. They started setting up these local governing committees called juntas. Officially, they said, oh, we're just holding things down for our beloved King Ferdinand until he comes back. But in reality, this was a revolutionary act. For the first time ever, they were running the show themselves. They were getting a taste of power, and once you get that taste, it's very hard to give it up.
What happened next was a total mess, frankly. The first attempts at independence were chaotic, and one by one, they all failed. In Mexico, a revolt was crushed. In Venezuela, the First Republic, with Bolívar involved, fell apart in a year. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Napoleon is defeated in Europe, King Ferdinand comes back to power, and instead of talking, he sends a huge army to South America to crush everyone. By 1815, the revolution looked totally dead.
The crackdown was brutal. The revolutionary leaders were either dead or in exile. It really seemed like it was all over. But from the ashes of that total defeat, one man would rise. A man who had failed, been exiled, and used that time to cook up a new strategy and an unbreakable will to win. This was Simón Bolívar's moment.
So, who is this guy? Well, Simón Bolívar was born into one of the richest families in Venezuela, total aristocracy. He was part of the very system he was about to destroy. He was educated by tutors who filled his head with all these new Enlightenment ideas. And on a trip to Europe, standing on a hill in Rome, he famously swore an oath that he would not rest until South America was free. He fought in the early wars, got defeated badly, and had to flee. But it was there, in exile, at his lowest point, that he had his biggest breakthrough. While he was in Jamaica, he wrote this incredible document, the Letter from Jamaica. This wasn't just some angry letter. No, this was a brilliant analysis of why they had failed before. Disunity, no clear vision. And it was a master plan for the future, a whole continent of free countries, all working together. Even in defeat, the guy was thinking bigger than anyone else.
Now, this is a super interesting and crucial part of the story. How does he make a comeback? He's broke, he's in exile, and who helps him? The Republic of Haiti, the nation founded by former slaves. The Haitian president gave Bolívar ships, guns, and men. But there was one condition, and it was non-negotiable. Wherever Bolívar won, he had to free the slaves. This was a massive deal. It forced Bolívar, who came from a slave-owning family, to make social justice a core part of his revolution.
So with Haitian help and a new vision, Bolívar launches his comeback, and it starts with one of the most insane military moves in history. The Spanish controlled the coast, so he couldn't attack there. Instead, Bolívar decides to do the impossible. He marches his army of 2,500 men straight over the Andes Mountains. I'm talking frozen passes over 12,000 feet high. For a month they climbed, men and horses dying from the cold. It was an absolutely crazy, death-defying gamble.
And the gamble paid off. Big time. Bolívar's army comes down from the mountains and completely surprises the main Spanish army. At the Battle of Boyacá, they win a huge, decisive victory. This wasn't just another battle. It was a game changer. It shattered Spanish power in the region and freed all of modern-day Colombia. The revolution finally had a secure base to operate from.
And Bolívar immediately starts putting his big vision into action. He wasn't thinking small, just freeing one country at a time. No, he was thinking huge. He announces the creation of a new superpower, the Republic of Gran Colombia, a massive country uniting what is now Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama. What a statement.
So the war is being won. The tide has totally turned. But Bolívar's political dream of a united continent, that's about to hit a massive wall. First, another great hero enters the picture. And second, the land itself was just too big to tame.
You see, while Bolívar was fighting his lightning wars up north, another legend was methodically working his way up from the south. This was José de San Martín. He'd freed Argentina, and then, just like Bolívar, led his own incredible march over the Andes to free Chile. So you have two absolute titans, both moving towards the final Spanish stronghold, Peru. But they had very different styles. San Martín was the careful planner, the pro-soldier. Bolívar was the charismatic gambler, the visionary.
In 1822, the two men meet in a city called Guayaquil. Just them, behind closed doors, deciding the fate of a continent. What did they talk about? Did they argue about strategy? About what kind of government to create? Did their egos clash? Nobody knows. To this day, it's one of history's great mysteries.
But we know what happened next. And it was a shocker. After the meeting, San Martín just retires. He resigns his command, sails to Europe, and never comes back. He just walked away from it all, leaving Bolívar in complete charge to finish the war.
With full command, Bolívar and his best general, Sucre, went in for the kill. They chased the last Spanish armies high into the mountains of Peru. At the Battle of Junin, there was this incredible cavalry fight with swords and lances. Not a single shot was fired. And then, at Ayacucho, Sucre delivered the final knockout blow. The war was over. 300 years of Spanish rule finished.
And this is the great tragedy of Bolívar's story. He won the war, he freed a continent,
But almost the second the fighting stopped, his political dream of unity started to die. By 1830, his beloved Gran Colombia had shattered into 3 different countries. The same thing happened in Central America. The continent was free, but it was completely broken up.
So why did this grand dream collapse? Well, it was a bunch of things, really. The biggest reason was just local identity. People felt Venezuelan or Colombian, not Gran Colombian. The geography didn't help. The Andes Mountains and the Amazon jungle are massive barriers. And the wars had created a new kind of leader, the caudillo, a local military strongman. These guys had their own armies and their own ambitions, and they weren't about to take orders from Bolivar.
Bolivar died in 1830, a completely heartbroken and disillusioned man. He famously said that serving the revolution was like plowing the sea, pointless. He felt he'd failed. But history isn't so sure. So, when the dust settled, how should we look back on this man?
This is the big debate, isn't it? Was he the great liberator, the ultimate freedom fighter, or did he become a dictator, betraying the very ideals he fought for? And the thing is, you can make a strong case for both.
I mean, the argument for hero is pretty solid. The guy is called the liberator for a reason. He freed 5 countries. His military genius is undeniable. That Andes crossing is legendary. He was a brilliant political writer, and his dream of a united continent, even though it failed, still inspires people today. But, and there's always a but, there's the other side of the coin. As he saw his dream falling apart, Bolivar got more and more authoritarian. He decided that the people weren't ready for democracy, and only a strong hand could prevent chaos. He literally proposed a constitution with a president for life. In his last years, he gave up on the constitution and just ruled as a dictator. A man who loved liberty, but ended up fearing it.
All right, for our last part, let's bring it a little closer to home and compare this whole epic story with our own freedom struggle in India. Because when you put them side by side, you see how the road to freedom really shapes what comes after.
This is where it gets really fascinating. Look at the contrast. Latin America's freedom was won through 15 years of brutal war, led by generals. India's was won mostly through decades of political struggle and nonviolence, led by political and spiritual leaders like Gandhi and Nehru. Afterwards, Latin America broke up into tons of countries. India had the tragedy of partition, but the main part stayed as one big republic. And the final outcome? The wars in Latin America led to a century of instability and military strongmen. The political struggle in India helped build the foundations for a stable, if sometimes messy, democracy. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that how you win your freedom matters. A lot. A freedom won by armies tends to create a culture where the military has a lot of power. A freedom won through politics tends to create a culture built on laws and civilian rule. The means you use really do shape the ends you get.
And that leaves us with one big final question that's still relevant today. Bolivar's #1 military goal was independence. He got that. But his #1 political goal was unity, and he failed. So after 200 years of division and rivalries, is that original dream of a united Latin America still possible? Or was it just a beautiful but impossible dream all along?
Look, Bolivar's story is this massive epic of victory and heartbreak, and there's so much more to it. If you're keen to really get into the details of his life, the wars, and his ideas, you should definitely visit our website. We've put together some detailed notes and a great quick revision mind map to help you get a grip on it all. The link is right there in the description below. Thanks for watching.